Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about this really interesting book. It's called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I have to admit I was a little bit skeptical at first, like another parenting book, but this one really blew me away, and I know that you've read it too, so I'm really excited to dive into it with you.
Yeah, this book is amazing. It's really stood the test of time for a reason. I think one of the things that's so powerful about it is that it really gets into the psychology of how children think and feel.
Yeah, it really focuses on that emotional intelligence piece, and that was one of the things that I found so interesting. Um, like the whole idea of acknowledging your child's feelings, even the negative ones. I think as parents, it's really tempting to just want to jump into problem-solving mode or distract them when they're upset.
Right, and especially if you're in a public place or something like that.
Totally, or you're in a rush,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, you just want to get things moving.
But if you think about it from the child's perspective, if you're feeling really overwhelmed by anger or frustration and someone just brushes it off or tries to distract you from it, it doesn't make the feeling go away. It just makes you feel like unheard and not understood.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that the book does so well, is it really helps you kind of step into the shoes of your child.
Yeah.
So instead of just dismissing those feelings, the book really encourages us to actually acknowledge them.
Right.
And not just acknowledge, but reflect them.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, and there's this great anecdote in the book that really illustrates this. Remember the story about the mom at the mall with her son who refuses to go into the play area? You know? And she could have so easily just gotten into a power struggle with him. But instead, she just acknowledged his feelings. She said something like, "You're feeling bored with this play area. You've been here a lot. And guess what? He ended up going in willingly." Wow, I probably would have resorted to bribery, but the fact that just acknowledging his feelings actually worked is pretty amazing. What's the psychology behind that?
Well, there's actually been a lot of research that shows that when people feel understood, their stress levels actually decrease. It's like a physiological response. So by simply reflecting your child's feelings, you're actually creating this sense of safety and validation for them.
So it's not about agreeing with the feeling, it's just about acknowledging that it's real for them.
Exactly.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and the really fascinating thing is that that feeling of being understood often motivates cooperation way more effectively than commands or force ever could.
I find that so counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it. It's like you're building a bridge of connection, and once that bridge is there, it's so much easier to get them to move in the direction you want them to go.
Exactly. You're working with their emotions, not against them.
Okay, so acknowledging feelings is key. Now, another part of the book that really struck me was its stance on punishment. It pretty much says, traditional punishment is a no-go. I have to admit, I was a little surprised by that.
Yeah, it is a bold statement, but the book makes a really compelling case against punishment. You see, punishment often focuses on controlling behavior through fear and consequences. And it might work in the short term, but it doesn't really address the underlying reasons for the behavior.
Right. I imagine it could create a lot of resentment and maybe even damage the relationship in the long run.
Absolutely. And instead of internalizing values, children might just learn to avoid getting caught. And that's not what we want. We want them to understand the why behind the rules.
Right, not just fear the consequences. So what's the alternative? The book talks about this concept of problem solving, right?
Right? It encourages parents to engage in this collaborative problem-solving process with their kids. It's about shifting that dynamic from, I'm the authority, you're the rule breaker, to, we're a team, let's figure this out together.
Okay, I love that. So how does that actually work in practice? The book had a few examples, right? What was that one about the bathroom light?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah.
So you have a child who constantly leaves the bathroom light on. And instead of nagging or punishing, the parent decides to have a little family meeting about the electric bill. And they explain in a playful way how leaving the light on wastes energy and costs money.
That's so clever. So it's not a lecture, it's an engaging conversation. I bet that got the child thinking about the consequences in a whole new way.
Exactly, and it probably made them feel like a part of the solution rather than the problem.
I'm curious, though, does this approach really work for more serious issues? What if a child does something that's actually hurtful or disrespectful?
Well, the book addresses that too. Remember the story about the son who lost his textbooks? And his mom was understandably angry, but instead of yelling or punishing, she took a deep breath. And she calmly explained how his actions affected her.
I remember that one. And it's so interesting because her honesty and vulnerability actually prompted this really mature response from him. He apologized and came up with a plan to replace the books.
Right, and that's the power of this approach. It encourages empathy, responsibility, and problem solving, even in those challenging situations.
Okay, so we've talked about acknowledging feelings and problem solving instead of punishment.
Yeah.
What else stands out to you as a key takeaway from this first part of the book?
Well, I think the book's emphasis on encouraging autonomy is really important. It's about giving kids the space and freedom to make their own choices, even if they make mistakes along the way.
Oh, so you mean letting them choose their own clothes even if it clashes horribly?
Well, maybe not that much freedom at first,
Yeah.
but the idea is to gradually give them more control over their own lives, starting with small choices.
Okay, and the book had that great anecdote about the single dad and the box of cookies, right? He just gave his son a week's worth of cookies and let him manage them himself.
And the son actually rationed them responsibly. It's a reminder that kids are often capable of much more than we give them credit for.
That's a good point. I think we as parents tend to underestimate our kids' abilities sometimes. We want to protect them from making mistakes, but maybe those mistakes are actually valuable learning opportunities.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another important point. The book cautions against crushing children's dreams or ideas, even if they seem far-fetched. Remember the story about the little boy who wanted to sell his homegrown squash?
Oh, yeah, it was just this tiny little squash, but his parents encouraged him anyway, and he ended up having this adorable little roadside stand.
Right, and even though he probably only made a few dollars, it boosted his sense of initiative and entrepreneurship. It showed him that his ideas have value, even if they weren't perfectly executed.
So even if we think our kids' idea is a bit silly, we should encourage them to explore it anyway.
Within reason, of course.
Yeah.
But the point is to nurture that spark of creativity and let them discover their own potential. It's about fostering their sense of agency in the world.
Okay, so we've got acknowledging feelings, problem solving, and encouraging autonomy. What a foundation. I feel like I need to take notes.
It is a lot to absorb.
Before we move on, though, I want to ask you, what resonated with you the most from this first part of the book? What really stuck with you?
For me, it's the power of acknowledging feelings. It seems so simple, but it's such a profound shift in how we approach communication with children.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if this approach could be beneficial in other relationships besides those with children. What do you think?
It's funny you should say that because one of the things that I found so interesting about this book is how universal the principles are. It's not just a parenting guide. It's really a guide to respectful and effective communication in any relationship.
Okay, hold on. So you're telling me that the same techniques that we use to talk to our toddlers can actually work with, like, our grumpy boss or our significant other? I'm a little skeptical.
I understand your skepticism. It does seem counterintuitive. But if you think about it, the core principles are the same. We all crave that connection and validation and respect, regardless of our age or our role.
Okay, I'm willing to keep an open mind. So walk me through this. Let's say I'm having a disagreement with my partner. How would this acknowledging feelings thing actually play out in that scenario?
Well, imagine you and your partner are arguing about something. Let's say it's about chores. Instead of getting defensive or, launching into a counter argument, you could try saying something like, I hear that you're feeling frustrated because you feel like you're doing more than your fair share around the house.
Okay, but what if that's not actually how they're feeling? What if they're just trying to get out of doing the dishes?
Even then, acknowledging what you perceive to be their feeling can be helpful. You could say, it seems like you're not happy with the current division of labor. Can we talk about that?
Wow, that's so much more constructive than, hey, you promised you'd do the dishes.
Right. And the amazing thing is by simply acknowledging their perspective, you're creating a space for dialogue. You're shifting the dynamic from confrontation to collaboration.
Okay, that makes sense for conflict resolution. But what about praise? Surely we don't need to be praising our partners or colleagues in the same way that we praise a child, do we? I can just imagine the eye rolls if I started saying, good job on that presentation, honey.
Yeah, I hear you. But again, the principle of descriptive praise still applies just in a slightly different way. Think about it when someone expresses genuine appreciation for something specific you've done. How does that make you feel?
Well, it definitely feels a lot more sincere than just a generic compliment. Like if someone said, that presentation was really insightful, I especially loved how you incorporated those real-life examples, that would make me feel pretty good.
Exactly. It shows that they were really paying attention and
Yeah.
that they value your contribution.
So instead of just saying, great job, we should try to be more specific and acknowledge the effort and thought that went into whatever they did.
Precisely. And you know what? This kind of genuine appreciation can be surprisingly powerful in any relationship. It can boost morale, strengthen bonds, and even inspire greater effort.
Okay, this is blowing my mind a little bit. I'm starting to see how these seemingly simple principles can actually have a huge impact on all sorts of interactions. But let's bring it back to parenting for a second. The book talks a lot about how our communication styles need to evolve as our kids grow. And honestly, that's where I struggle the most. It's like what worked with my sweet little 5-year-old totally backfires with my moody teenager.
Oh, I think every parent can relate to that. It's a constant process of adaptation. But the good news is the underlying principles we've been talking about still apply. It's just a matter of adjusting the delivery.
Okay, so give me some specifics. How do I take these principles and actually apply them to my teenager who seems to speak a different language entirely? Like, let's take active listening. It was pretty easy when my kid was little and would just chatter away about their day, but now it's like pulling teeth to get them to talk about anything.
I hear you. It's definitely more challenging with teenagers. But here's the thing. They still crave that connection and understanding even if they don't always show it. In fact, they might need it even more during this time of intense change and self-discovery.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we get them to open up?
What starts with creating a safe and non-judgmental space for them to share their thoughts and feelings. And that means resisting the urge to lecture, criticize, or offer unsolicited advice.
Oh man, that's so hard. It's like my default setting is to go into fix-it mode, especially when I see my kids struggling.
I know it's a natural instinct,
Ah.
but sometimes the best thing we can do is simply listen with empathy and validate their experience.
Okay, but what if they're making choices that I think are harmful or unwise? Like, what if they're hanging out with a bad crowd or not taking their schoolwork seriously? Do I just sit back and say, oh, honey, I understand how you're feeling?
That's where the problem-solving approach comes in. Remember, it's not about condoning their behavior. It's about working collaboratively to find solutions. You could say something like, I'm concerned about some of the choices you're making, and I want to understand your perspective. Can we talk about this?
So it's about inviting them into the conversation rather than dictating the terms.
Exactly. And you know what? Teenagers are much more likely to cooperate when they feel like they have a voice and a choice in the matter.
This is all starting to click for me. It's like these principles are the foundation, and then we adjust the application based on the age and stage of our child. What about praise? How do we adapt that for teenagers who are notoriously sensitive to anything that feels fake or patronizing?
Well, the key is to be genuine and specific in your praise, just like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But with teenagers, it's even more important to avoid comparisons or focusing on achievements.
Mm.
Instead, try to highlight their efforts, their growth, and their unique qualities.
So instead of saying, you got an A on that test, you're so smart, I might say, I'm really impressed with how much effort you put into studying for that test. It shows real dedication.
That's a great example. It's about recognizing their process and their growth mindset rather than just the outcome.
Okay, so we've got acknowledging feelings, problem solving, encouraging autonomy, and descriptive praise. It seems like these principles can truly guide us through the ever-changing landscape of parenthood.
And you know what's fascinating? These principles aren't just limited to parent-child relationships. They can actually be applied to any relationship where we want to foster connection, understanding, and growth.
Whoa, hold on. You're telling me this stuff can work with my coworkers, my friends, even my family? I'm officially intrigued. Tell me more. Okay, my mind is officially blown. You're saying that these communication principles from a parenting book can actually help me navigate the tricky world of adult relationships.
I know, right? It sounds a bit crazy. But if you really think about it, don't those same dynamics play out in our adult interactions too? Like we've all experienced those frustrating conversations where we feel unheard or misunderstood or even attacked.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, just the other day, I had this really awkward encounter with a colleague. We were brainstorming ideas for a project, and he just like shot down every suggestion I made without even like trying to understand my reasoning.
Hmm.
I left that meeting feeling totally deflated.
That's a perfect example of where acknowledging feelings could have made a huge difference. Like imagine if your colleague had said something like, hey, I hear that you're really passionate about these ideas. Help me understand why you think they'd be a good fit for this project.
Wow, that would have totally changed the tone of the conversation. Instead of feeling dismissed, I would have felt like respected and heard.
Right, and that's the power of these principles. They create a space for empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
And that can really transform even the most challenging interactions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light, so acknowledging feelings is key. But what about the problem-solving part? How does that translate to adult relationships?
Well, think about a time when you had a conflict, with a friend or a family member. Maybe you were disagreeing about politics, or maybe it was something more personal. Instead of getting stuck in that cycle of blame and defensiveness, what if you approached it as a problem to be solved together?
So instead of trying to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong, we try to find a solution that works for both of us.
Exactly. You're shifting from an adversarial mindset to a more collaborative one. And the amazing thing is when people feel like they're part of the solution, they're much more likely to be receptive to different perspectives.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, but let's talk about praise for a second. I'm still struggling with how that fits into adult relationships. It feels kind of weird to praise my boss or my romantic partner.
It might feel a little awkward at first, but remember, it's not about patronizing them or giving them empty compliments. It's about expressing genuine appreciation for something specific that they've done.
So, like, for example, instead of just saying, good job on that report, I might say, I was really impressed with how thoroughly you researched that report. It gave me a much deeper understanding of the issue.
Exactly. You're acknowledging their effort and the impact that it had on you. And that kind of genuine appreciation can go a long way in strengthening any relationship.
This is all starting to click for me. It's like the principles from this parenting book are actually like a blueprint for building stronger, healthier relationships with everyone in our lives.
That's it. And the beauty of it is that it's never too late to start incorporating these principles into our interactions.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've gone way beyond just parenting tips and explored how these really powerful communication principles can transform our relationships with partners, friends, family members, and even colleagues. I feel like I have a whole new toolbox for navigating the complexities of human interaction.
Me too. And I think the most important takeaway is this. By approaching our interactions with empathy, respect, and a willingness to truly listen, we can create more meaningful and fulfilling connections with the people who matter most to us.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. We hope you've enjoyed this journey of discovery, and we encourage you to try out these communication techniques in your own life. You might be surprised at the positive impact they can have. Thanks for tuning in.